Welcome to Expert Profiles Atlanta, where Atlanta's influencers and innovators share strategies for overcoming obstacles and achieving success in business and life. Here's your host, best-selling author and Atlanta influencer, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my special guest is Léonce Crump Jr. Now, Léonce is an author. He's an international speaker and the founder and senior pastor of Renovation Church in Atlanta. In 2008, Crump answered God's call to relocate from Tennessee to Atlanta and begin the process of planting Renovation Church. He details the obstacles he and his family faced and the revelations that he uncovered during this process in Renovate, Changing Who You Are by Loving Where You Are. And that's a book that we'll talk a little bit about in the show. But Léonce, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me, my friend. It is an honor and a pleasure to get a little bit of time with you.
Excellent. Well, you know, I'm looking for just a positive message right now. There's so much negativity going around, Atlanta, where this is focused, but, around the country and around the world with, coronavirus. People have a lot of fear, which is stopping them doing some of the things that they would do on a normal day-to-day. But there's also a lot of problems that have come about this. Before we get into that, give us a little bit more of your background. You were brought up in Tennessee and you moved to Atlanta. Take us back to that point in your life.
Sure. Actually, I was not brought up in Tennessee. I was brought up in Louisiana. Grew up a part-time Catholic from New Orleans and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And I became a Christian when I was 16 years old and didn't really understand discipleship at that point, just kind of believed the gospel and went about my life. But I would say I became a disciple of Jesus at the University of Oklahoma, which is where I wrestled and played football. And there I was discipled by a man named Mike Wilson, a very kind and gracious man who really showed me what it meant to live life with Jesus. And then, of course, by the grace of God, I had a successful career there. I was a 3-time All-American in wrestling. I played defensive end and tackle for the Oklahoma Sooners football team. And I would go from there to nearly making the world team in wrestling. There was a time I was ranked 4th in the world. And then I signed with the Atlanta Falcons and was traded to the Saints. And that's where I finished my NFL career. And that is what took me to Tennessee to take on a coaching job there in Tennessee. And my wife of now nearly 15 years was in school there in Tennessee. And that's where we met and fell in love. And then we began to be ministry partners together. In the Chattanooga area and then in the Knoxville area. And it is from Knoxville that we moved to Atlanta to start Renovation Church. So it's a very, very abbreviated version of my varied life.
Right. And, my background is in sports as well. It's the reason I came over to the United States from Scotland. So it's very much part of me and who I am as well. But also the faith side of things is, very much part of who I am too. Kind of grown up, like you said, a part-time Catholic was kind of where I was as well, but didn't really understand life and, hearing that voice of God until probably my early 30s. So everybody has a different journey, but talk to me. What was that call that took you from Tennessee then to Atlanta?
Yeah, so I just had this kind of burning passion to see the church fulfill its mandate in the public square. And what I mean by that is most Western churches have a come and see mentality. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm certainly not the final authoritative word on what the church should be, but just experientially. And I think some of this is data driven as well. There is we'll build the building. You come to us. We'll tell you about Jesus and hope for the best. And I just had a vision and a view of the church. One, shaped by not really growing up in church, I think, but two, kind of shaped by history, where in ages past, you see churches involved in what I like to call human flourishing, which I do believe is the way of Jesus. And so you see churches involved in ensuring that the hungry have food and that the naked are clothed and that orphan children have families. You see churches involved, as Jeremiah 29:7 speaks of, and as 1 Peter speaks of as well. You see churches involved in the welfare of the city. So they are not just an entity unto themselves. And there was a restlessness in me and in my wife too, where we were, that it was a good church. It was a large church. They were reaching a lot of people in the kind of come and see mentality. But we weren't seeing very much change in the community around us. And we wanted to be involved in a movement that would actually see the flourishing of the broader community as much as it did benefit the growth of our church. And so after wrestling with that and feeling that passion and kind of going back and forth on how we could see that happen, we prayerfully decided that we wanted to move to a major metropolitan area and embark on this journey, on this experiment to see if it could actually be a reality. And after much prayer and consideration, we landed on the city of Atlanta, as opposed to Miami, New Orleans, Sacramento, San Francisco, and LA. We really felt led to Atlanta. And so we moved here together in 2008.
Well, congratulations. It's definitely a big step to move to any city for whatever reason, but to come and plant a church and have that impact that you're talking about within the local community is certainly a big undertaking. Let's talk about some of the issues that are going on right now. And I know, you want to make that impact in the community. Well, now more than ever is a time where the community is probably reaching out to you and the church for help. What have you seen from your congregation during this time? What are the needs and wants that people are reaching out with?
Yeah, so this is pretty fascinating, Neil. And it actually goes back to the original reason that I felt and my wife felt the impulse we felt. So there wasn't a lot of reaching out at all, actually. And up until this last week, maybe, we really, as our church, Renovation Church, we had to spin the flywheel to actually get some things going because organizations and entities and communities weren't reaching out. They were really kind of paralyzed in trying to figure out who would help them. Is the government going to help? Are our local families fiscally strong enough to be able to help? Will our board members be able to help? And this is kind of the varying spectrum of organizations that we're participating with. And so what we found over the last 5 or 6 weeks is we have really had to proactively step into voids because those entities were not reaching out to us. And once we were able to wade into those waters, so to speak, the needs were endless. Rent assistance, basic dry goods, toilet paper, of course, and baby wipes and diapers. And, one of the community schools we're working with, we found that 90% of the students are on free or reduced lunch, which means that for whatever societal or interpersonal reasons, those families cannot adequately provide food for their children, or their children would not be on free or reduced lunch. And so now they're home all day. How are they going to eat? So these are the needs that we have surfaced in pursuing these opportunities. And To be honest with you, I have seen our church rise in beautiful ways, even as we deal with our own uncertainty. There's joblessness happening in our church, and those people are still being generous to the community in ways that have really been quite astounding, and it's really been beautiful.
Mm. Yeah, one of the phrases that I've seen going around is, the church isn't empty, it's been deployed. And I think that is just a beautiful picture of what the church is meant to be. It's not necessarily always just coming together and worshiping and seeing people there. It's, what are you doing once you've left the church? Are you out there spreading the message? Like you said, there's huge needs there. How have you been able to talk to people within your church, within your congregation, and organize some of the things that need to get done?
Yeah, so we've always had a fairly viable web presence. And so, even though many churches hesitated and everybody made their choices for their own reasons, I have no judgment on that. But I have friends in Seattle. I have friends in Italy. I have friends in Paris, France. I have friends in China. And having conversations with them really pushed me to want to expedite our shift toward a more pronounced digital presence. And so about 1 week after Seattle went on their shelter-in-place situation, and before we were even on a shelter-in-place situation, myself and the other leadership of Renovation Church decided to go ahead and make that shift. And so we put a lot of energy and a lot of effort into undergirding our digital communication platforms and making sure that everyone who needed access to that would have access if they desired it, and then being proactive in over-communicating across the scope of a week, and then leveraging platforms like Google Meet, as well as Church Online, as well as Zoom, to continue to communicate and continue to facilitate community and connection, and ensure that as best we can keep people tied into the pulse of our church and into the pulse of one another and into the pulse of our city across these digital mediums.
Mm. Yeah, technology has really helped out during this time. I'm glad we are at a stage now to where we are able to use some of these things in order to stay connected. But, one of the main things with the church is coming together and worshiping in person and just, feeling the energy in the room. How have you been able to try and duplicate that with, sharing your praise and worship during with technology?
Yeah, so the first thing we did was realize we couldn't duplicate it, right? Mm. It is impossible, as you just described, to replicate the energy that comes with being gathered in a room with a group of people with a central focus, even if that comes in varying degrees. Everybody showed up for the same reason. We believe that this God, Yahweh, has something to say to us, and we want to hear it with this group of people. And so that's impossible to replicate. And maybe we'll get to this on the backside, but I do have some thoughts about how the future will take shape in that regard, because if you look at the data and the trends, church attendance was at an all-time low prior to this crisis. And I'm very interested to see, and I do believe that will be different when we are able to gather together again. So that's a little thought. I'll put a pin in that and say that, we know we weren't going to be able to duplicate it, but we wanted to provide a way for people to experience the word of God and worship of God in their homes. And so what we've been doing is pre-recording a worship set with our different bands and pre-recording a message every single Wednesday. And then we put that for live simulated viewing during our normal service times at 9:30 and 11:15 on Sundays. And the platform we use, which I'm so grateful that Life Church, Craig Rochelle and that team produced this platform. The platform we use actually allows for digital engagement during this experience. And so it has an open chat room where you can actually communicate back and forth with people. We take prayer requests. There have been people who have come to faith that we're able to follow up with digitally, and then people just communicate with one another in the chat room. And it's a substitute. And you know, for us, the mentality we've taken from the beginning is this is not the ideal. This is a substitute. We can't duplicate what we used to do, but we want to be able to do something to facilitate word and worship until we can be back together again.
Mm. And speaking of being back together again, I know the governor is talking about lifting some restrictions. Do you think it is time to get back together in person, or do you still think that's a little while away?
I think the governor's prescriptions are premature, personally. And I have a lot of reasons for believing that. But the primary one is, if you look at the numbers, we are still on a pretty steep incline of cases and of deaths, and that is with limited testing. And so I really do believe that human flourishing, right, Jeremiah 29, dictates that we not gather back together again immediately. The other part is just very, very practical and very, very pragmatic. You know, in his plan, he outlined that churches should be able to gather again, but still practice social distancing. Well, for Renovation Church, we are a church of roughly 800 people, you know, sometimes more, sometimes less, but roughly 800 people. Well, at a 6 feet designation, you know, the space we use right now seats about 400 people. But if you put a 6 foot designation between those people, then we did the loose math just to play with it. We'd have to facilitate 7 to 8 worship gatherings per Sunday. And even then, we cannot guarantee total health. If we take temperatures at the door, if we provide hand sanitizer for every person present, all of the measures we might take, we still cannot guarantee that someone won't get sick from one of our gatherings. And when you look at the outbreak that took place in Albany, it was primarily rooted in two funeral services and a church gathering. And then it spread like wildfire from there. And so for me as a leader, I look at it as analogous to a structural issue in our building. You know, hey, the roof has a place in it that may cave in, it may not. Well, as a responsible leader, even if there's only a 10% chance that the roof is going to cave in the middle of one of our worship services and kill a handful of people, is it still responsible for me to gather those people there, knowing that I could possibly be endangering them? And so that is what has driven our decision making. So we are, not making any long-term strategies, because I don't think this is the time to do that. I think you plan short range and as fluidly as possible. And so we're looking at a plan to maybe try to ramp up gathering again in the late summer, and even doing that strategically and in layers, but not before then.
Well, there's certainly a lot to think about before making any decision, and we obviously want to think of people's health first. But, I've seen a lot of innovation within the church, and, there are times of change like this and disruption do make you change the way that you do things. And it also, with the emotional stress that people are under as well, it does draw people to the church. Yeah, we kind of touched on this a minute ago, but, what do you think the church is going to be like? Do you think the attendance online might increase? Do you think more people will come in person? What's the good that's going to come from this pandemic?
Yeah, I really do believe now, even based on data, that online attendance will increase. But I also believe that once things regulate again, that in-person attendance will increase as well. And so the two things that I see on the other side of this, and I could be wrong, but I highly doubt it, even based on what took place after 9/11. The two things that I see on the other side of this is, one, people are going to realize the isolation and the false sense of community we have lived with since the expeditious explosion of technology that allows us to feel connected to people, though we're not genuinely connected. Social media is not a genuine connection. There are aspects of it, but it's not real. And, I'll never forget a couple of years ago, an article came out called The Lonely Planet. And the central or main point of the article was, we are more connected than we've ever been, but somehow lonelier than we've ever been. And I believe that. And I believe it's been exasperated in this period of social distancing and semi-isolation. And so I think on the other side of this, church attendance physically is going to skyrocket. I also think that it'll continue to grow digitally, because digital mediums are such a low bar for people who are far from God. And so I'll tell you, for Renovation Church, for Easter this year, we had 5 times the people gather digitally than we have ever had physically. And I believe that's an opportunity to create kind of a seamless integration between the digital and physical that allows us to move in and out of those spaces, and neither one of the environments has to suffer.
Yeah, I think for many people, the digital service is, especially the younger Christians that are just learning a little bit, might be a more comfortable environment for them before really getting in and joining everybody at a church worship service. But
that's exactly right. And so it becomes your new front door.
Right.
And as they become comfortable with Jesus and become comfortable with faith and become comfortable with what the church actually is, then the digital medium will just become kind of a waiting room or a transition place into physically gathering.
Léonce, let's talk about finances for a minute. The church relies on people giving. I know there's a lot of people unemployed right now. Have you seen any?
22 million.
Yeah, that's a lot. Have you seen any difference in the giving to the church? And do you foresee any telling difference in the months and years to come?
So, again, even prior to the pandemic, charitable giving was at an all-time low in the nation. And so I think that is one of the variables we have to contend with, even as we look at the present situation. I will tell you that for Renovation Church, at least for the month of March, there was actually an increase in giving rather than a decrease. I don't know how that will flesh out for the month of April. I can tell you that right now we are on pace to be either normative or slightly above normative. And so, I think it's been a 50-50 crapshoot, so to speak, as I've talked to other national leaders, where about 50% of the churches are experiencing mild to significant downturns right now. And another 50% are experiencing either stabilization or increases. And I think there are variables to that. I think one of the primary variables with respect to that is whether churches had already moved to a digital giving platform. So, Renovation Church for the last 2 years, over 80% of our giving has been online. So we don't require, we haven't required in over 2 years that you be physically present to actually be generous toward God through our church. And so I think that's one of the variables that help to keep some stability during this time.
Mm. And of course, people lean towards the church to help them out whenever there is a time like this. But it's not just in these times as well. Week to week, there's people that need rent assistance and food. And, these problems are ongoing for many
Correct.
people. So it is important to give to the church, because without your generosity and your donations, none of these things can be done. Now, when we look at the church's role in this, as well as the government's, whose job is it really to, care for the people in your community?
Well, so if we were together, I would draw for you three circles. And in one of those circles would be the private sector. And in one of those circles would be the government. And in one of those circles would be nonprofit institutions, including the church. And I believe responsibility to varying degrees lies at the intersection of those three circles. There are things that the government should be primarily responsible for. There are responsible ways to do business in the private sector that can help ensure human flourishing over and above your bottom line. And then the church's primary responsibility in the world after preaching the gospel is taking care of people physically. And you see that. And I would even say those two things are intertwined and inextricably connected. And you see that in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so I really do believe that at the intersection of those circles are the greatest flourishing for people in any community. And we are seeing some of that here in the city of Atlanta, but in my opinion, not nearly enough. So the simple answer is I do think the church should be primary in caring for the community. But the more complex answer is I believe that the private sector business world, as well as governmental agencies and institutions, also have a contributing responsibility that promotes the most flourishing for the most people.
Mm. Yeah, it definitely takes everybody to, lend a hand and help, whether it's government, business, private sector, or the church and nonprofits. But your background also is in professional sports as well as the music industry. What can you tell me from that side of things? How are they reaching out to help as well?
Yeah, so there are several athletes who are donating signing bonuses and large sums of money to these efforts. One of my very good friends, Lecrae Moore, who's a Grammy-winning artist, is facilitating not only conversations and fundraising efforts, but he and another friend actually put in hand washing stations and other sanitary measures for the very large homeless population here in the city of Atlanta. And so we are seeing artists and athletes step up in some unique and beautiful ways in this time. And I would frankly say even some of the private sector businesses are stepping up. I don't know if you caught wind of this, but, Shake Shack returned $11 million in PPP loan money so that can go to other entities that might need that to a greater degree. And so, one thing that I'm hoping for on the other side of this, Neil, is an increased awareness of collective social responsibility that, and that's different than socialism, right? It doesn't diminish the capitalistic framework wherein my human capital and my intellectual capacity create the very best opportunities for me. But it is also an understanding that is a stewardship that I've been given and not just a right for me to have. And so how do I leverage that in a socially responsible way to create opportunities for other people? And I'm really hoping to see more of that on the other side of this. And I am seeing some of it in the midst of the crisis.
Well, it is causing us all to take a step back and just, really look around us and look at the world and, see what is important. And I'm glad people are realizing that they can step in and help and are doing so. We don't know how long this is going to continue to go on, but we know that there's going to be change in the world going forwards. Léonce, I appreciate you sharing some of that stuff with me today. If you would talk about your book for a minute, Renovate. Tell me how you came to write that.
Yeah, honestly, a good deal of what I just said is the core of my book. In short order, I believe God made the world to be a certain way, and he covenanted himself with his creation to sustain the world to be that way. I believe two human beings as the progenitors of all humanity decided to do things their way. And that DNA marker is in every single one of us to do things our way. But I believe God's desire is not just to, quote unquote, get us to heaven, but it's actually to restore and redeem the world that he made. And I could prove that from Genesis to Revelation. And so when Jesus came announcing that the kingdom was coming, but the kingdom was also here, that declaration was, yes, there's a preferred future coming. Revelation 21, no sickness, no mourning, no death, no tears. But a part of that, a foretaste of that, if you will, has broken into reality right now. And the people responsible for stewarding that foretaste are the human beings who have come to believe that Jesus is real, that his message is worth it, and that this world will be restored. And so that is what my book is about. And it's taking that general idea and extrapolating it into the prominent pieces of the human experience. So pain, race and culture, marriage and family, and of course, church. And so extrapolating that general idea into all of these human spheres and asking the question, how does this news change how we do all of these things? And how does this news change how we participate in the world wherever God has placed us?
Mm. Well, a great message. And if you would share with us where people can pick up the book, I will leave a link in the show notes as well, but also how people can contact you and the church if they do need help or they want to connect with Renovation Church.
Yeah, so you can find the book wherever books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, etc. You can find the book there. The Lord has been very gracious to me. It's done pretty well. Of course, I'd love to see it do better, not for the fiduciary aspect, but because I believe it's a powerful message. So Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you find books sold. And then as far as reaching me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it is at Leonce Crump, LeonceCrump. You can find me there. And then if you'd like to connect with Renovation Church, either for assistance of any kind, or if you would just like to see a community made up of some 30 different ethnicities and people from every strata of the socioeconomic stratosphere, if you will, then you can check us out at www.renovationchurch.com and check us out on YouTube. If you look up Renovation Church, you can find our teaching and our worship there as well.
Well, Léonce, it has been my pleasure talking with you today. Thank you for doing what you're doing. It's a very responsible position that you have put yourself in to help people out and, of course, lead them to the Word of God. If you don't mind, would you help us close with a prayer or a blessing?
I do not mind at all. Father, thank you for the great grace you have shown all of us, even with the breath in our lungs. Would you make our desires real in this time, that we would be fully human, that we would love in a way that is transformational, and that we would be socially responsible in a way that puts the needs of others right up against our own for their good, and for those of us who are followers of Jesus, for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, Leonce Crump is the lead pastor of Renovation Church in Atlanta. Thank you very much for being my guest on Expert Profiles Atlanta today.
Oh, this was a gift, my friend. Thank you so much.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
Thank you for listening to Expert Profiles Atlanta with Neil Howe. To learn more about the resources in the show or to listen to past episodes, visit expertprofilesatlanta.com.